Hello and welcome to the second part of my Skaven build diary. Now, as a quick point of order, this will probably be a little bit longer than some of the other videos that I've done. Reason being is I tend to be quite brutal with my editing usually. Normally when I do a video for how I paint things, like a tutorial, I'll have about half an hour's worth of video that then gets trimmed down to about half that for those sort of 10 to 15 minute videos. Now, that's generally because when I'm doing like an instructional sort of thing, I want to be brisk and just get to the point. A few little bits of information along the way, but I want to cut down on waffle. Now, some of you guys have mentioned that you actually quite enjoy having me on. You know, putting these videos on in the background while you're doing your own paintings. So what I'm going to do with these build diaries is a little bit different, and I won't be quite as vicious with the editing. So these might be a little bit longer, and you'll probably hear me get to some waffling, but hey, that's part of the point of this. It's going to be me talking through sort of the thought process and how we come to different decisions when I'm making this new army. So the first of those I want to touch on is how I'm going to paint these guys. Now I'm going to start off, first of all, I've got the Skaven Warlord, and this is a cracking model. I think he's really cool. This is one of the new plastics, well, relatively new, and he's just straight out of the box. What I've done then is gone ahead and given him a spray with Mournfang Brown, and then I've given him another coat of Mournfang Brown over the top from the pot. Now the reason for that one is that, for the most part, the Citadel colour sprays are really good colour matches for, you know, the pots of the same name. Mournfang Brown is an exception though, and when you spray it, it's brown. You might see a little difference in tone between the base and the actual rat himself there. So ordinarily, while I'd quite happily, you know, for example, McCrag Blue is a really good match. But in this case, I had to go back over, I really want that extra bit of warmth and the slightly reddish tone. Now I agonized over how I was going to paint these guys, because I tend to find that there are a lot of Skaven armies out there that have like a red tint to them. Some part of the cloth or something is red, or it's on banners everywhere and all that, and I wanted to do something different, because me being me, I've got to be extra about it. The problem is, though, that the clans of the Skaven, so the great clans like Scryer, Mulder, Eshin, and Pestilence, all have sort of colours associated with them. Now, I thought about doing green, but that kind of blocks me into either Scryer or Pestilence. And I'm not a big fan of just flat grey like Eshin would have, or the sort of brownish, yellowish tone that Clan Mulder would have. So really, that leaves me with red. But I don't want to do red. So inspiration struck from the strangest source. You guys might have seen recently the new Warlord kits for Necromunda, and they've done quite a cool thing with the redesign. Their colours used to be quite, you know, late 90s biker gang, to put it one way. A lot of denim, red bandanas, the works. Whereas this time around, they've gone for a very sort of muted palette. It's dark greys and blues with a few accent colours here or there, and I really like how that looks. So I figured I'm going to steal that idea. So what I'm going to go for is almost identical to the new Warlord colour scheme, where I'm going to use the Fang as sort of the blue for the basis of their cloth, and then I'm going to use a really dark grey. Now, you could use Eshin Grey as a replacement for this. I'm going to use Vallejo's Black Grey. Now, the reason for this is mostly the coverage. I am going to go back over and highlight these, so I don't nearly worry too much if the finish isn't as vibrant with the Vallejo colours, but what I want is the coverage. It will make very little difference on this fella here. But if I can save doing an extra coat over 40 rats, 60 rats, you know, across a whole army, that might save me an hour or more. So Eshin Grey would be the closest match for Citadel, but I'm going to use Black Grey for some of those areas of cloth. And then I thought about what I could do for the yellow accents, which go with the Orlok. So while most of his armor is going to be Leadbelcher, I'm going to do some accents in Balthazar Gold and get that sort of warm, brassy tone going, which I think will be really cool. Now the cool thing with that as well is that these four basic colours will be the basis for the entire army. I might do a little bit more with them on this model here, and I'm going to employ a slightly different style to what I normally would. I'm going to be, I guess, messy. It's the way to look at it. I don't want to do too much more to my Warlord than I do all the rest of my rats, because I do want them to look better, but I don't want them to look like I spent 8 or 9 hours painting him when the rest of the guys are going to look pretty standard. So we'll start off now, and instead of any of these colours, I'm going to grab out some Sylvaneth bark and give them a quick dry brush. Now I'm going to go with Sylvaneth bark as my dry brush and be quite liberal with it, because I want this to serve as sort of a first stage highlight in some areas too. It's also going to help me when I come to go ahead and do my highlights, because it'll give me a clue where I want all that to be. So in the case of these guys, like I said, be quite generous, and it will look quite chalky going on to begin with. That's okay. We're going to do plenty to it. The whole point of this is really just to break up some of that flat brown, with the bonus that if I miss anywhere, like especially on the rest of the clan rats, I'm painting away and I happen to miss an area of colour like his fur or, like his fur or somewhere on his armour, it won't matter because it'll be that patchy brown that everything else is. Now, the cool thing with that too is, on one model, it might look a little bit scabby and ugh, but across 40, 50, 60 miniatures, you're never going to see it. And even if you happen to, it's still going to be in a colour that doesn't really matter. It's going to be a dusty brown, which suits the rest of the army pretty well. So I'm just going to do this now. I've almost finished in the time that I'm chatting away to you here. So let's just finish off the back of his wood here. I'm not going to worry too much about getting it all over the banner because, I'm going to do plenty to the banner. But just for the sake of anywhere that I might miss, there we go. There is step 1, a little bit of Sylvaneth bark. Oops, I'll hit the camera too. Now to tie in with the rest of the army, I'm going to do his banner in the fang, which means I don't then want to do this sort of cape thing he's got going on in the same colour. I think it would be a little bit bland. So I'm going to do the banner in blue and I'll do his cape in that dark grey. But on the back of him here, he's got a little bit of sort of scrabbly extra cloth, which looks like an undershirt or something. So I'll do that in the fang as well. Tie those two areas together. He's still clearly wearing the colours for his army, but without being, really messy about it and a bit bland. So let's get that on now. So get yourself whatever sort of base layer brush you like to use. The medium base brush is a pretty good one for this. I've just got one of these scabby old brushes that I quite like using for these. Keeps a decent point. But this is just going to be going around now and getting all of this blue. I'm going to be a little bit more careful than I would normally when I come up to the wooden areas on his staff sort of section here. But, that's really much of a much. I could fix that up if I wanted to. So I'm just going to make sure all of those blue areas are blue. Now with that fang on, we'll get onto our grey-black. Now, if you're doing clan rats, for example, what you might find is that they tend to have clothing in sort of 2 or 3 parts. So they'll have like a jerkin, an overcoat or something, normally a little bit of scrappy cloth over the top. And that gives you an opportunity to go back and forth, putting these sort of 2 main army colours on random parts. So sort of, what's the word? Alternating whether you're doing a jerkin with the lighter colour, or you're doing his underclothes in the same colour. You can mix them around and get some variety that way. A little bit more difficult painting a single model, but hopefully you get the principle I'm talking about there. I'm not waffling, am I? Yes, I am. Oh dear. But all I'm going to do now is just quickly blat around. I mean, again, almost finished while I'm chatting away to you here. But yeah, just wanted to mention how easy it is to use just 2 colours across a random, scraggly looking army. Now at the same time, I think I'll go ahead and I'll base coat the rock that he's standing on too. Obviously we're going to do something different to it when it comes to finishing it off so that it won't look like his cloak. But this dark grey will work pretty well as a base coat for it. So let's just get into it now and I'll do the whole area. Now while that grey is drying, we can get straight on and start painting the metallics. Now, as always, I suggest that everywhere that you're going to do gold or brassy colour as well, just go ahead and base coat that with lead belcher too, because you'll find it much easier to get that over the top. Makes a good base coat for almost all of your metallic colours, actually. So I'm going to look at like these little tabby bits he's got. Just get in there. And all of this armour. Okay, the only thing I really want to be careful of as I'm putting this on is up around his arms. I don't want to get anything on his fur, because honestly, the shading on that's pretty much done for me with the dry brushing. So there's not too much to talk through on this one, to be honest. So I'm just going to go ahead now and let's bloop, 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 get that done. Now I'm just going to chuck down some Balthazar gold anywhere I want that nice brassy colour. I'll probably come back with a little bit of Retributor armour as well, just to brighten up some of the areas and make them an even more prominent gold. But let's just go around now and we'll break up some of this really flat silver with a little bit of warmth. Now we come to an interesting point of contention. What colour to do the skin? Now, Ratskin Flesh has got a little bit more sort of an orange tone to it, and Bugman's Glow is what we'd normally use as the basis for human skin. But, because I'm going to Agrax Earthshade the whole model, I mean, are you at all surprised? If we do that over Ratskin Flesh, it's going to give us a dark orange. You know, it's going to look as though we're going to paint something up from orange, and I'm not too keen on that. Whereas Bugman's Glow, you guys will normally notice when I'm painting human skin, I will do something over the top of Bugman's Glow after the wash. So I think this, with that slightly reddish tone that Agrax Earthshade will give us, this will work better as a base coat for the skin. So I'm going to use Bugman's Glow for that. Now, on top of that, there is another question we have to ask ourselves about painting bloody Skaven, and that is, where does the skin start? I have seen, and believe me, I've been up and down the bloody web store looking at different examples. There are 3 ways that the heavy metal team paints the skin on the arms of the Skavens. Skaven, sorry. Anyway, either they do from the wrist, and they do that little sort of join there at the wrist, and just the hand is skin. Or they do the underside of the forearm up to the hand, or they paint the whole arm in skin tone, except for the little fluffy bits of fur along the back. And there appears to be no rhyme, reason, or logic behind any of the choices that they make. So, you know, I don't know. I am going to do the easiest. You know, when I'm presented with 3 choices and they all appear to be correct, let's go with the one that's going to save some time. So let's paint his hands, his face, and his little rat friend. Let's get that Bugman's Glow going. So this shouldn't take too much. This is now just getting in there and base coating all of the areas that I want his skin to show through. And for example, here we'll do on the back of his hands. Now I like the idea of doing the arms in the fur color because it's going to make the storm vermin that I paint stand out all the more, because storm vermin have dark grey-black fur, whereas everybody else has sort of normal brown patchy colours. Whereas the Greyseers, who are the wizards for the Skaven, they've got white. You know, they're like albino rats. So I think in letting the fur remain on the hands and arms, so on the arms rather, it's going to make it a little bit easier to see who and what everybody is. So let's go around now, and I'm just going to do that. Do I want to paint the skull and skin? No, of course I don't. What am I talking about? Let's not forget his feet and his little rat buddy too. Alright, we're starting to get somewhere. Now he's really starting to come together. So what I'm going to do now is quickly just go around and do like the little details. I'm not going to fuss too much with those. So I'm going to use Xandri dust on any sort of bone and on his teeth and claws. I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab. He's got a little satchel just here on the back of his belt. I'm going to do that in that nice beige color. Any threads, so for example the one holding the skull here onto his back banner, I'm going to do that with good old Rakarth Flesh. And then any leather parts I'll just quickly blat over with Rhinox Hide. I might do his rat black. I'm undecided. But at any rate, I'm just going to quickly whip round and do all of those. That's really just the basic stuff's out of the way now. So, like I said, to nobody's great surprise, we'll start off with Agrax Earthshade over the whole model. But then I'm actually going to give him a second wash. Once this is dried thoroughly, I'm going to break out the non-oil, and that's going to go over areas like his armor and on that rock he's standing on. In particular, I want to do this on the armor because with that in combination with the Agrax Earthshade, it's going to really dull down that metal. On the rank and file guys, I'll be quite content with just Agrax Earthshade and then a highlight. But for the boss, what I want to do is darken his armor down a whole lot and then bring it back up with some more lead belcher and a couple of highlights. So his is going to look like it's old, battered, beaten, but always polished and brought back up to a shine. So that's why I'm going to really darken it down. Likewise, for his cloak, obviously the Agrax Earthshade is going to do most of the shading for us, but then the Nuln Oil will darken down that rock and introduce a different tone to it. So let's crack open the old Agrax Earthshade first. That's the important one. Now you could use a shade brush or a layer brush, for example, to apply this, but I'm going for zero subtlety. And I'm going to basically bucket the whole model in this. So I'm not going to be too careful. And all it is just getting Agrax Earthshade everywhere. I want to really make sure that I'm working it into the recesses. So under his cape, for example, I want to make sure I do get his feet, and I'm going to go around and make sure all of this gets a nice grotty coating of Agrax Earthshade. We'll come back and we'll see how he looks when that's gone on. Now, while you're waiting for your shade to dry, I thoroughly recommend doing something useful for the time, and go ahead, make yourself another cup of tea. Now with that Agrax Earthshade dry, that's gone just how I hoped it would, and it's really helped bring out all of the detail on him. It's darkened down his look quite a bit, but that is fantastic. That's what I was hoping it would do. Now as well, I've made sure it didn't pull anywhere too significantly along his banner, and that's really cracking. I'm really pleased that that's worked as well as it has. So what I'm going to do now is get myself some Nuln Oil. And I've got just a medium layer brush here. And what I'm going to do is all over his armor again in Nuln Oil, except I don't want to put as much on as I did with the Agrax Earthshade. This is just to darken this stuff down a little bit more. And I'm not going to do it on his sword, I don't think. I'm just going to do this on all of the silver armor now. Now look how deep and horrible that's gone. I am really into that. That's dried just the way I wanted. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and start bashing on some highlights. Now because I want this guy to replicate quite closely how the actual clan rats are going to look, I'm going to go straight up to Skaven Blight Dinge and just start by painting on some simple straight-ish lines along his cloak. Now these will not show up terribly well at first because Skaven Blight Dinge can be a little bit thin. But what I'll do is just go back over and, anywhere that it doesn't show up immediately, I'll just bap it with another quick one. Don't need to really be too careful with this. All I'm doing is getting down most of that shading. Now, if I'm totally honest, that didn't go quite as bright as I was hoping it would. The shading is visible there, and it's, clear that I have gone and done a second color, but it's not quite as sharp a highlight as I wanted. So I'd probably skip that part on my main body of rats. So what I've got now, this is old Storm Vermin fur, and this is like the next step up again. And let's try that again. There we go, getting some slightly sharper highlights. Now straight over the top of the old grey-black that we would have washed, this will be a really sharp highlight. So on the clan rats, I think that'll make a big difference. What I'll do now is just finish this off. On the Warlord, I guess that's kind of cool. Now that's more what I'd meant. You might remember me saying earlier on how I was going for sort of really sharp and visible from across the table highlights. That's what I've got there. And I think that's going to work the business on those clan rats. Because if I put them down on the table over here, you can still see, as soon as that focuses, you can still see the shading and the highlights. So that's what I think I'm going to go for. Up close, he's not going to look fantastic because you can see really clearly those gaps in colour. But I think from a distance and for the army style that I'm going for, this is going to work really well. So on from that, we'll go ahead and we'll get on some rust grey. Now this is the step up from the Fang. And I'll see first of all if this is going to be a proper sort of transition to colour or if I'm going to just go straight up to Fenrisian grey. Let's just... yeah, that's the ticket. Let's get some nice... woo, sharp highlights on there. Cool, okay, so let's do the same thing again. Real sharp, cartoony edges. Okay, that is not going quite as planned. That's not... whoo! I'm trying to rush that a little bit too much for that to really work. So let's try instead, before it all goes horribly wrong, let's get some Stormfang, which is the old dry brush colour. Let that on a little brush. Now this is my little medium base brush that I keep on hand for just such an emergency. And let's try quickly blasting that over the top. Now I'll need to hold this closer to the flag itself, or banner itself, as I start getting a bit more generous with it. But that's not too bad. Might find there's one or two extra things we can do to really bring that up a bit. But, you know, in comparison to his cloth, I kind of like that. Patchy and horrible. So let's see if we can do the other side, and we'll see how that comes out. Okay, that turned out a little better than expected. Not perfect, but again, this is the this is what happens when you experiment as you go. But this is all helping me figure out how I want the basic clan rats to look too. What can I skip? So I've got here just a little bit of Longbeard Grey, just to do the very edges and get a little bit more shading on this thing, so that it's not all that flat blue. And this will just help break it up a little. And then just to prove how it should have looked, there's the rust grey over the Fang on that little tabard bit at the back of his cloak. And I think on the actual clothing for the clan rats themselves, that'll look to business. But yeah, for disaster control, I quite like how that turned out. So what I'm going to do next is we'll do the armour. And you guys might remember a little while back, I took one of these cheap €1.50 thingies and trimmed it down to make a little stippling brush. And that's what I'm going to use for most of this armour, I think. So we'll get back again, my lead belcher. And we're just going to stipple this back where I want that patchy, horrid metal. So instead of edge highlighting it in the traditional fashion, I'm just stabbing some paint on. And we'll see what we get. I might go back in and actually physically highlight it the old way, but we'll see whether or not I need to do that. Then, making his first appearance, I've got my small layer brush and a little Stormhost Silver, and I'm just going to edge in the edges of the armour as I normally would. So these will be really shiny by comparison. And again, as always, just use the edgier brush for these nice straight edges. You'll find it much easier to get a nice straight shiny edge there. Yeah, that metal's starting to look properly beaten. Now what I'm going to do is get my Liberator Gold and do pretty much the same thing to all of those brass areas. Now there's not too many of those. So if I show you here on a little sort of belt section, get in there and just carefully edge along the edges of the armor there. And rather than sort of individually painting around these rune things he's got chipped into his armor, just lightly, like if you organize your brush so that you're holding it sideways, you can sort of dab around it. That won't give you as sharp an edge, but it will help you very quickly give the impression of having highlighted these ruined areas, because it will stop the paint from slipping into the cracks, but you still get that shininess around it. So for models where you want to, do things the quick way, that can be quite an easy way of getting those runes done. So let's just chuck on a bit more of this. Just a little Ushabti bone, we can highlight the skull. Then just a little bit of Doom Bull helps us bring out the edges of these darker leather parts. You may find you want to be a little more generous than I'm being with these, but once this dries, it gets quite dark. That being said, it's still quite a nice colour for this. So let's just get that in there, do his belt. Yeah. Now, while I had the Ushabti bone out to do the skull, I should also have done his teeth and claws. So let's quickly get in there now, and we can finish those off nice and quick. These don't need a huge amount. Just really touch the edges where you want the very sort of points of them to look sharp. Otherwise, it helps if you leave that really grungy, washed Zandri dust underneath, and then you get that cool three-dimensional effect. Now for most of his skin, I'm just going to go straight back to Bugman's Glow, and I'm going to use that to paint over the most exposed areas while leaving the recesses all nice and shaded. Now this will be a little bit tricky to do on camera, so I might skip over a couple of these bits rather than showing you. But what I'm going to do is, there we go, just like that. So it'll bring it up to a nice warm tone again. I actually quite like how this looks. I'm going to go ahead, I think I will highlight, oops, let's get a bit closer there so you can see what I'm doing. I think I will highlight some of these areas with a little bit of Cadian flesh tone. But on the clan rats themselves, this would be where I'd stop. I wouldn't bother doing anything more than just a quick blast of the old Bugman's Glow again. So, let's get that on. Then let's do a little bit of Cadian flesh tone just along the edges of some of those details, like all in the front of his face, his little wiggly ears, his nose. I don't want to go too far with this. Now I've got one of my really little dry brushes, and I'm just going to lightly do along the edge of his base stone in Dawnstone. And if I feel like getting a little bit more generous to make it, stand out from his cloak a bit more, we'll see how that turns out. But this shouldn't take too much. Then the last thing I've got to do, really, is his eyes, and he'll be pretty much finished. Okay, just a little bit of Mephiston red. That should be plenty. Bleep. To do in his horrible little eyes. Whew! Do you hear that? Concentrating? Whispering. Now to finish him off, I've just got a little bit of Sterling mud. I'm going to apply that all over the sides of his base. Now, just while that gunk on his base is drying, I'm going to get a brush full of Lamian medium, maybe two. And then I've got here some Waywatcher green glaze. Now this behaves differently to how the washers do, which is why I'm watering it down, there you go, with a little medium first, because I don't want it to cover as strongly as it would. I might even mix a little bit of water in there. What I'm going to do here is start from the tip of his blade. Here we go. And I'm going to draw this green shade just up towards the base. So there it starts to collect. There's a very faint sickly greenness about it that gets stronger towards the base of his blade. So I'll flip to the other side, do the same thing again, just paint it all over, but always sort of drawing the paint up to, don't know how well you can see it at this angle, up towards the very tip of the blade. With that layer dry, what we'll do is exactly the same thing again, but start about halfway up the blade this time, and use a little bit more green in our mix. So same thing again, just looking for it to pool at the bottom of the area where I'm painting it on. Then with that second coat of the green dry and his base finished, that's our boy done. Now I'm actually really pleased with how he came out. He turned into being quite a lot of fun to paint, if I'm honest. And I think one of the key things about having made a couple of mistakes on a model that I was still keen to go ahead and fix, I think I learned a fair bit about how I'm going to go ahead and do the clan rats. If I'd encountered any of those little speed bumps on the clan rats, I probably would have pitched a sulk and put it aside. But with this fella, it actually turned into an opportunity to try something different. The little banner thing I quite like. It's not going to win any painting competitions, but that's not the point. And particularly with the Skaven, I think you got to sort of pick your battles. And looking kind of cool and pretty good, rather than everything having to be perfect. I'm quite pleased with that, if I'm honest. So I'm going to go ahead, get a couple of photos of him. And, if you guys enjoyed that, slightly more sort of, I guess, informal version of events, me just taking the time and having a wee bit of a chat as we go. There might not have been as many sort of very specific painting tips, but maybe you still found something interesting there. Whatever the case, guys, feel free, drop me a line down there in the YouTube box, or my Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. We'll go ahead today, rattle the old tip jar. There is a coffee page link down there too. If you like what I'm doing, you want to drop a couple of dollars in, it is greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps keep me in paint and glue. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.